Let us have a moment of quiet. Grant us, we ask, to speak, to hear, and to learn, so that our fears may be banished, our minds may become enlightened, our faith be increased, and our steps directed towards you. Amen. If the polls are to be believed, about 40% of our country today believes that we need to make America great again because we are exceptional. We should have incredible enthusiasm for the great things that we are and have always been. There is an attempt to glamorize the United States as if it is the only country on the world that is unique and fabulous. And there is a sense of surprise that people are outraged. If we're to believe the polls, 60% of the people are incredibly outraged right now. There is panic and anger. And oftentimes this anger, though justified, is angry because they feel as what's happening right now is an aberration. That right now what's happening has never happened before in this country. Duh. And so the problem is that, in fact, we are exceptional in doing one thing, forgetting our history. Americans have a horrendous way of forgetting history and geography. By the way, I don't know if you remember that. Was it 20 years ago, American seniors were asked by the National Geographic Society to identify major countries in the world, and 80% of the graduating seniors identified the United Kingdom as France. Yes, the United Kingdom, I remind you, is an island. France is on the mainland. Yes. Colin Woodward wrote a book in 2011, which I revisited, and it's called American Nations. And it says, because of our incredible backgrounds, in the plural, we have had a tumultuous past. If it's been anything exceptional, it's been exceptionally tumultuous. And I want to play a game right now. Now, his language of dividing things up. But I want to see if anybody here can guess. That's why I put that thing over there. If any of you can guess some of the backgrounds that he pointed out that go into it. And I'll read all 11 in a minute. Anybody else have a guess they want to put in with some of the backgrounds? Anybody? That would be part of our country.
Enslaved Africans.
Huh?
You mean ethnic backgrounds or historical?
Historical countries. Our country backgrounds and what they bring with them.
Germany. West Africa.
Spain.
The West African nations
Irish.
that were stolen from.
Okay, let's go back in American history and start with
First Nations.
our First Nations would be one. We still have 300,000 First Nations in this country, who own, I might point out, several chunks of land, thanks to a bunch of very smart Native American lawyers who went to court in the 70s and 80s, pointed out that treaties are still real. And they still have binding effect, much to the horror of those who were squatting on land and using their rights. We have First Nations. All right, the next one he mentions was Yankeedom.
Yeah,
These are the Puritans and Pilgrims who came over and wanted to start a theocracy and had a whole sense of the way you work, rules, things to be followed. Then he points out that there was New Netherland. We tend to forget the Dutch were here.
Yeah.
Oh yes, the Dutch, who were at the time, the Dutch at the time were the most liberal country in Europe.
They still are.
They still are. And they brought,
second.
they still brought with them, if you go to New York, certain parts of New York, New Amsterdam, and you go to certain parts of New Jersey, you're going to still find a very strong value in education and diversity. Then there comes the Tidewater. These are the second and third and fourth sons of a British aristocracy who came over here to redo the English country gentricide, in which you had the landowners owning the country, living in kind of a rural aristocracy, and they wanted to continue that in Virginia and the eastern shore of Maryland. There was the famous, well, I'll get that in a moment. Then there's the Deep South. The Deep South, of course, is where you had, somebody once quipped, you had tobacco, land, and Episcopalians and horses, and you had mules, cotton, and Baptists. The idea was you had the aristocracy and you had the poor, and then you threw in the African American slaves, and it was entrenched that this is the way it should be. Not as enlightened as their northern peers in the Tidewater, they became very, very angry. Then there's another group called New France. Ah, the French! How much we forget New Orleans and southern Louisiana. This is not the Louisiana of, oh God, what was his name? The first televangelist who got caught and said, I have...
Jimmy Swaggart.
Yes, Jimmy Swaggart, who did the very, very famous thing. Some of you remember when I did this over UU Miami, the thing, I have sinned! He cried and cried. The place was packed, and he brought in thousands of dollars for crime. Amazing.
Nice work if you can get it.
Yes, but that is not New France. This is New Orleans and Quebec. We forget New France, and they had a big impact on us. Then we move across to the Midlands. Greater Appalachia. Greater Appalachia.
The Scots-Irish.
Yes. Yes, and the Scots-Irish, by the way, just a quick thing to explain some of the voting in this country. There was a great known as the Highland Clearances, when the Scots aristocracy literally kicked people off the... These are other Scots, with no notice. If they were nice, they gave them 3 months' notice, no money to move, kicked them off the lands in which they had to emigrate to the United States or Ireland or Australia. They go to Ireland and they find that they had the same problems, not with the Irish, but with the English. So the Scots-Irish came with an attitude against authority, abuse of authority, central Pennsylvania, and then moved all the way down into the Appalachians where nobody can get them, and moved them off the land very, very quickly. They have a very, very strong attitude about authority, rules, and regulation, and they vote. Then there is the Midlands. The Midlands are kind of, you're from the Midwest. Midwest.
Well, I am, but actually, southern Indiana is Appalachian.
Is it? Okay. The Midlands. I remember I had a congregation in Chicago, and a good half of the congregation was from Middle America that I didn't know anything about. Very calm,
Sweet.
nice, sweet, relaxed, and really not interested in rocking the boat, thank you. Life is difficult enough as it is. Okay, then there is the far west, which people fought against bad weather, against everything, droughts, tornadoes, and everything else, and developed a strong sense of self-sufficiency because there was nothing out there to help them, and then God blesses the left coast. He said all of these countries have different attitudes, different opinions, and they don't play well together. And they shift their alliances depending on who's going to look out for their best interests. And he said, if you think this is one nation, you really haven't studied the demographics, and you haven't studied the patterns that people brought over with them.
Chinese as well.
Well, they didn't include those. Now, I know you're doing the counseling, and others you do counseling as a thing.
Well, mentoring. Teacher education.
One of the things that we have learned, talking about Europe, we used to call them geographics. You think if you've got a problem, if you move, the problem's going to go away. All you've done is put the problem in a bag or in a box. You move, and guess what? At some point you have to unpack it, and there you are right back again. People from Europe bring all of these attitudes with them, thinking they're going to come to the new world, and they've got a new geography, but they've got the same old attitudes. And these people do not play well together. All right, then we take a look, and we say are things in aberration. Listen to the following. A woman is campaigning, she's black, and they call the police on her, because they didn't know a black woman. She is, by the way, the representative, the elected representative of this area. We have a house being spray painted by neighbors because they didn't think the people belonged there. Turns out they own the house and have been there for a long time. We had a woman wearing a Puerto Rican t-shirt, and she got abused, and the cops stood by. He's no longer with the force. We had a kid in the pool. You've seen this, of course, where the lady came up, called him a punk, and slapped him. She was black, I'm white, and slapped this kid. How could you? Anyway, the cops went to get her, and she bit the cops. Now, I'm getting someplace with this in a minute. We had a man at a pool with his socks on. They called the police on him because they didn't think he could live. What was a black doing? He owned his own thing. He had a key to get into the pool because then we could get in with the key. But they called. The police were very embarrassed by this. We had an 8-year-old selling water. Police was called on her. We had a CVS manager call somebody on another black person because he had an issue with them. He's no longer with CVS. And we had the 2 men at Starbucks.
And the boy who was mowing
the grass, mowing the grass. Now, what is different now than before? This stuff has been going on for 200 years.
Yep.
The difference is we have cell phones now, and people are now videoing it. But the point is, people are outraged and said, "How could this happen? This has been going on for a couple hundred years. The difference is we're aware of it. But the same behavior has been going on." There's a passage. You see where I'm going with this. Then it says we've got also a problem. We've really regressed into the 1890s in a sense. There's a book called Squeezed that just came out by Alyssa Court. She says, much that middle-class professionals took for granted in previous generations, including home ownership, decent health care, comfortable retirement, is now out of reach. Where I went to college, it cost $2,500 a year. It is now $55,000 a year, and there's scholarships. Who can afford $55,000 a year to go to college? I don't know how we went. I mean, it was a different time, but still, that was a lot of money back then, too. Okay, meanwhile, wages have stagnated, unions have nearly vanished, in some sectors, technology has replaced human workers. Many people find themselves carrying school and credit card debt, low-paying jobs, temporary part-time jobs. Those in certain industries, like tech or finance, are forced to work long hours as a matter of course. Others supplement jobs that once upon a time would have been considered full-time, such as teaching, temporary gigs, and driving Uber as a second or third job. Where I'm going with all of this is that this is an exact replica of where we've been. Things go in cycles, and I'm trying to tell you we're back to cycles again, where we had a gilded aristocracy and everybody else was, there was very little middle class. And just to remind you how much we forget about American history, does anybody know what happened in 1850? We had the Great Compromise, and in that was the worst legislation, and I've mentioned this a dozen times in American history, the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yep.
Thousands of free slaves were taken from New England, and the police were helpless by this act passed by Congress that you could gather slaves. You went after slaves, but all you had to have was a bill in your hand or a forged document that was signed by a judge from the South, and you were collecting free people out of Connecticut, New York, and they said roughly 20,000 freedmen were taken back to slavery in the South. This was the Great Compromise. Does anybody know what happened on October 28, 1919? The 18th Amendment. Does anybody know what that was? Prohibition, which you might realize also started this on interstate mobs and the organization of organized crime. July 10th, 1925, does anybody know what happened? In Dayton, Tennessee, the famous Scopes trial.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, in which evolution was considered bad and no more monkeys descending from the monkeys. We're going to have God's creation in 6 days. By God. February 19th, 1942, does anybody know what happened? 62% of these people were American citizens.
The Japanese internment.
Japanese internment. And let's not forget June 12th, 1967.
Kent?
No. It now means that people of different races can marry.
Mary.
Oh,
Yeah.
the loving trial.
Yes.
Yeah. Love
Now, what I'm trying to point out is while people are outraged today, you want to go outrageous, We've got 1850. We got Prohibition. We got the Tennessee. If you're black and white and in love, God forbid you try to marry, you are in love. So we're squeezed, folks. And now's the time to talk about why we need replenishment. My own opinion is we are in a cycle. I don't like to mention politics in sermons, but it is not surprising to me that we have resurgent fundamentalism and our current president, because we were due for this. If you take a look, Martin Marty, I wish I could come up with this, I didn't. Martin Marty was a famous church historian at the University of Chicago, and he said every 80 to 100 years, fundamentalism raises its ugly head and the damage is significant. 1925, at 80 years, 100 years, where are we? 1923, 25, the Scopes trial and raging fundamentalism, prohibition. We're right back now with raging fundamentalism on all sorts of levels being done for our own sakes. Because we are basically heathens, we don't understand the word of God is understood by interpreting the scriptures that word of God literally. Since we don't understand that for our own sakes, we will be guided by those who do. And to help us, it'll be done in law, if not done in law, by those who are important in terms of interpreting the law. So we're right back, I'm saying, in a cycle. And so if that's the case, we need replenishment. And there's some things that we can do. I don't know, I just made a list of things right off the bat. For those of you who are into deep spirituality, chanting, meditation, prayer, and fasting. They're all good. For those of you who are athletes, hiking, swimming, walking your hound daily for a couple of miles, Zumba, and the gym. These are all replenishments, folks. And you can combine these. Massage, acupuncture, yoga, and tapping. Tapping is a new thing now where you take pressure points and you tap and you chant. And by the way, not to give my hostess a thing here, but your son helped save my life. Her son is into massage therapy. This last Easter, I wound up with 60 research papers, 2 weddings, Palm Sunday, and Easter. And my body took a toll. My heart was fine, but my body cramped up. I have never been that physically out of sorts, everything cramped. So I got hold of her son, Corey, and he came over, and he did 1 day of, really solid massage. My wife has clients that are into acupuncture, a doctor, so I did acupuncture, massage, acupuncture, massage, acupuncture, massage, acupuncture. Every other day, and I found it worked. You may think, oh, let's not talk about this. This is New Age. Woo! Let me tell you, acupuncture's been around for 5,000 or 6,000 years. The debate is whether it's Indian or Chinese in origin. Who cares? The fact is, it can really work. I do say, however, I must say that the acupuncturist said, you know, given your age and your skin, coming regularly would be helpful to help the circulation. You're not getting any younger. Anyway, having said that, don't forget, then there's fun. Replenishment comes with fun. And I think we're all messed up here. There is a Puritan hangover, and I have a perfect example of this. Yesterday, I was goofing off, and I felt guilty. I was reading Anne Perry. I don't know if you know her at all. She writes these Victorian, they're good, Victorian page-turners, mysteries, but she tells you what Victorian society was like and London, and she knows the rookeries and the Seven Dials and the smells and the soot and all this other stuff. And I'm reading this thing, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, and I'm goofing off. And I said, Rita, I feel guilty. I feel I have to be doing something. And she says, me too. And I'm thinking, we can't even, did you ever see that thing in the New York Times last year where they did all these things about Americans doing vacations? And then all the other people around the world doing vacations? Everybody else is swimming, having a great time, and what Americans are there with their laptops and their phones. We don't know how to have fun. Fun is part of replenishment. Reading, goofy stuff, fun stuff, mystery stuff, romance, you're going to say, really? Yes, really. Fun stuff, just stuff that lets you go. I need to read stuff that's not theology, stuff that's religion. I'm sick of it. I get so much. You need a break. I read page-turners. I love to be able to say, I never saw that coming. Yeah, I like science fiction too. I like some weird stuff from Yes, all right. Now, TV. How many of you watch TV series? You binge on TV series because it's fun. We discovered a new thing by Sarah Pullman called new tricks. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. She bundles a case. She's put in a thing where they have to look at old cold cases. So they hire 3 old retired males. Oh my heavens, it is good going the way they go after the cold cases. But they're English. They said to her, you never were a copper in the 70s or 80s, were you? And she said, no, why? Because they do things illegally. Like, they take things when they're not supposed to take things, but it saves the day. It's funny. It's just plain stuff. Looking at TV, looking at stuff, it's fun. It vacates the stress that you're under. We forgot how to have fun. Now, I would like to suggest, in closing, that we need to replenish ourselves in a circle. The 4 reasons why. Very quickly, we need to take care of ourselves. And I don't mean this about me, myself, and I don't mean this about all ego, and I don't mean this going on some kind of, it's all about me. We are what we've got. This is it, folks. You start with what you've got. And you've got to take care of yourself. Because if you don't, and I don't mean this unkindly, if you don't, who's going to do that? Plus, most of us in this room are too independent for our own good. Am I right? Yeah. Am I right? We will take care of ourselves. We will. Ray says, do you need to get lunch? I said, I'll take care of it myself. She said to me one day, do you ever let anybody help you? She said, and I'm thinking of that, it's not just me, we all don't want to bother anybody. Is that right? A lot of us don't want to bother anybody. It's a big burden, folks. Trying to do it all yourself is a big burden. So I said, we got to look after ourselves. How do you replenish yourself? How many times can you go to the well all by yourself? Somebody sometimes needs to carry you. Sometimes you need to let somebody take you to the well to help you dip in. A hug. One of our good members said this week, I need a hug. I don't need anything else, I just need a hug. How do we take care of ourselves? Why? Because if we can't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of our family and friends. Love your neighbor as yourself. The famous Jewish saying that was repeated by Jesus, if you can't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor. If you want to love, you have to start here and then it goes outward. You begin with yourself and then you move outward to love your neighbor. And then you take care of how do you do your work. If you're not happy about yourself and who you are, how can you do good work? And I mean work not just for money, but work for others. You can say, I work in the tech industry, Kenneth. It's all that, yeah, but you've got workers with you, co-workers. Have you taken care of them and have they taken care of you? And finally, I realize we don't mention this often, but I, as you well know, believe, you're sick of hearing this, I'm sure. I really think the Hindus had it right when they talk about divine realities everywhere. How do we, in all of this stress, take a moment? There was a poet. I'm amazed at my ignorance. Mary Owen. Have any of you heard of her? You have, of course. Anybody else? Poet laureate. She said, and I love this, it must be a disappointment to God if we are not dazzled at least 10 times a day. Now, if you see divine reality in everything, there's all kinds of stuff dazzling us everywhere. Especially where we live here in Miami, palm trees, flowers, all kinds of beautiful stuff. So we need to replenish. A circle of me, our friends and loved ones, our work, and to enjoy the divine around us. We're in one of those cycles, in a cycle of replenishment as well. Amen.